Keep your hands where I can see them. Step back.
Why am I being searched?
Turn around.
I didn't.
Turn around. Stop moving. Hands behind your back.
The AXON body camera recording captured Officer Neil Crawford approaching a black Mercedes at 10:38 in the evening on a Tuesday. What unfolded over the next 4 minutes would destroy his career, trigger a federal probe, and reveal something many already suspected but could now witness firsthand. The driver of that Mercedes was Edmund Williams, a 48-year-old man who happened to be the police chief of the entire department. Crawford had no clue whose car he was stopping, and what he did next, recorded in crystal-clear video, would become one of the nation's most viewed body camera clips. Quick question, where are you watching this from? New to the channel? Hit that subscribe button. Stories like this deserve attention, and your support keeps us sharing these real accounts. Edmund Williams had spent 26 years in law enforcement. He'd climbed the ranks from patrol duty to detective, then sergeant, then captain, finally reaching chief. He'd held the top position for 4 years. People respected him. He was firm but fair, known for disciplining officers who crossed the line. That evening, he was heading home after a community gathering at the rec center on the south end of town. He wore jeans and a plain black hoodie, no uniform, no visible badge, just an ordinary man in his personal car. Neil Crawford was 29 with 3 years on the force. He worked nights and had earned a reputation among his colleagues for being overly aggressive. 2 excessive force complaints sat in his file, though both had been dismissed following internal reviews. When he spotted the black Mercedes switch lanes without signaling, he decided to make the stop. Edmund noticed the flashing lights and pulled over right away. He wasn't concerned. He understood the process better than most. Engine off, window down, both hands on the wheel. He didn't reach for his wallet. He didn't move. He simply waited for the officer. Crawford's camera showed him walking toward the driver's window. Edmund turned his head slightly to look at him. Crawford requested his license and registration. Edmund explained slowly that his license was in his back pocket wallet, registration in the glove compartment. He asked permission to retrieve them. Crawford agreed, but warned him to move carefully. Edmund reached back slowly and pulled out his wallet. He passed over his license. Then he leaned toward the glove compartment and grabbed the registration. He handed both documents to Crawford. The whole interaction remained calm and respectful. Crawford returned to his cruiser. He ran the license through the database. This should have been the moment of recognition. Edmund Williams. That name should have registered. But Crawford wasn't paying close attention. The computer displayed the address, the spotless record, all the information, but no alert popped up saying, "This is your supervisor." Crawford just saw an ordinary license belonging to an ordinary person. He walked back to the Mercedes. He informed Edmund that he'd failed to signal during a lane change. Edmund nodded, saying he must have overlooked it. Crawford then questioned where Edmund had been. Edmund replied he'd come from a community gathering. Crawford asked what type of gathering. Edmund said it concerned neighborhood safety initiatives. Here's where Crawford made his choice. He claimed the explanation seemed unclear. He ordered Edmund out of the car. Edmund questioned why. It was a fair question. A signaling violation doesn't typically require exiting the vehicle. But Crawford repeated his command more forcefully. Edmund cooperated. He opened his door and got out. He stood 6 feet tall with a solid build. Crawford was shorter, around 5'9". The body camera revealed Edmund standing next to his car, hands clearly visible. Crawford told him to turn and place his hands on the vehicle. Edmund questioned again what was happening. Crawford ignored the question. He grabbed Edmund's arm and spun him to face the car. Edmund didn't fight back, but he didn't move quickly enough for Crawford's satisfaction. Crawford accused him of tensing up. Edmund denied it. His tone stayed calm, though an edge crept in. He stated he'd done nothing wrong and didn't understand the need for a search. Crawford interpreted this as defiance. He seized both of Edmund's arms and attempted to wrench them behind his back. Edmund instinctively resisted slightly, not aggressively, but because the motion was abrupt and harsh. Crawford immediately intensified his response. He kicked Edmund's legs out from under him. The sound of Edmund hitting the concrete was brutal, a dull, heavy thump. His right shoulder absorbed most of the blow. Then his head jerked sideways and struck the ground. The camera showed Edmund lying face down on the pavement, motionless for several seconds. Crawford drove his knee into Edmund's back and yanked both arms behind him. He snapped handcuffs onto Edmund's wrists. Edmund's face lay turned to one side. Blood streamed from his nose and from a gash above his eye. His breathing came hard. Crawford was also breathing heavily, pumped full of adrenaline. He radioed in that he'd detained a suspect who'd resisted. Another falsehood. The footage told a different story. Crawford hauled Edmund to his feet. Edmund swayed unsteadily. His legs buckled. The front of his hoodie was ripped and filthy. Blood dripped from his face onto his chest. Crawford escorted him to the patrol vehicle and placed him in the back. Throughout this, Edmund remained silent. He was disoriented from the head impact. Do you believe the officer had any legitimate grounds for this? Drop a yes or no in the comments. Crawford went back to the Mercedes. He aimed his flashlight inside, searching for anything suspicious. Nothing, just a pristine car with some documents on the passenger seat. He picked up the papers and examined them. They were notes from the community gathering. Across the top of one page, it read, Chief Williams, talking points. Crawford stared at those words. Chief Williams. He glanced at the license still in his grasp. Edmund Williams. His mind finally connected the dots, his face drained of color in the flashlight's glow. He rushed back to his patrol car and opened the rear door. He shined the light on Edmund's face. Edmund looked up through swollen eyes. Crawford's hand trembled. He asked whether Edmund was Chief Williams. Edmund stared at him for a long beat, then confirmed it. Crawford stood frozen. The camera captured the panic washing over his features. He'd just thrown his own police chief face first onto the street. He'd handcuffed him. He'd stuffed him in the back of a patrol car like a criminal, and every single moment was documented on the device strapped to his chest. He reached for his radio, then hesitated. What could he possibly say? He'd already reported having a resisting suspect in custody. Other units might already be responding. His thoughts spiraled. Edmund just sat in the back seat, bleeding and quiet. Crawford compounded his error. Rather than immediately summoning a supervisor and ambulance, he tried to manage the situation himself. He opened the rear door and told Edmund he'd remove the handcuffs. Edmund ordered him not to touch him. His voice turned ice-cold and firm. Crawford stepped away. Edmund instructed him to contact a supervisor and request medical help immediately. Crawford finally obeyed. He called for his supervisor and asked for medical response. He didn't explain why. He simply gave his position and stated it was urgent. Then he stood beside his patrol car, waiting, knowing his career had ended. Sergeant Lisa Valdez showed up 6 minutes later. She was Edmund's second-shift supervisor and had served under him for 2 years. She pulled up and saw Crawford standing by his vehicle, looking ill. She approached and asked about the emergency. Crawford gestured toward the back seat. Sergeant Valdez peered inside and spotted Edmund sitting in handcuffs, his face bloodied and swelling. Her eyes widened. She looked at Crawford like he'd lost his senses. She asked if he realized who that was. Crawford nodded miserably. Valdez opened the rear door and immediately removed Edmund's handcuffs. She asked if he was all right. Edmund said he required medical attention. The ambulance arrived 4 minutes later. Paramedics helped Edmund from the patrol car onto a stretcher. They assessed his vitals and started cleaning the blood from his face. Valdez stood beside Crawford and questioned what had occurred. Crawford explained he'd stopped the chief for failing to signal and things had escalated. Valdez asked how a turn signal could escalate to this. Crawford had no satisfactory answer. She ordered him back to the station right away, to wait in the watch commander's office. Don't speak to anyone. Don't leave. Just wait. Crawford nodded and climbed into his patrol car. His hands shook so violently he could barely hold the steering wheel. Edmund was transported to the hospital. The cut above his eye required 6 stitches. His nose wasn't broken, just severely bruised. He'd sustained a mild concussion from the pavement impact. His right shoulder was deeply bruised and would ache for weeks. The doctors documented every injury through photographs and extensive notes. Still with us? Stay tuned, because this gets even more intense. Back at the station, Word spread like wildfire. The chief had been attacked and arrested by one of his own officers. Officers came in early from their days off just to learn what had happened. Some couldn't fathom it. Others weren't shocked at all. Everyone knew Crawford had a short fuse. Everyone knew he could be rough. But this exceeded anything anyone had anticipated. The body camera recording was downloaded and secured within an hour. The watch commander reviewed it right away. He watched the entire sequence twice. Then he phoned the mayor at home near midnight and explained what had transpired. The mayor asked if he was completely sure. The watch commander confirmed he'd just viewed the footage himself. The mayor called Edmund at the hospital. He asked if Edmund was okay and whether he needed anything. Edmund said he was fine and would address this properly through official procedures. The mayor assured him the city would fully support him. Edmund thanked him and ended the call. Officer Crawford sat in the watch commander's office for 3 hours before anyone addressed him. Eventually, an internal affairs detective arrived. She read Crawford his rights, the same rights he'd neglected to read to Edmund. She asked if he wanted legal representation present. Crawford declined. He'd answer questions. The interview ran 90 minutes. Crawford confessed everything. He confirmed he'd stopped the chief for a minor traffic infraction. He confirmed he'd commanded him from the car. He confirmed he'd applied force when Edmund challenged the search. He claimed he felt threatened. The detective asked what specifically had threatened him. Crawford couldn't provide a concrete answer. She asked if he'd recognized Chief Williams. Crawford said no, not until after the handcuffs were already on. She asked what he did upon realizing his error. Crawford admitted he'd delayed and attempted to resolve it himself rather than immediately requesting help. She asked if his body camera had recorded everything. Crawford confirmed it had. The detective concluded the interview. She informed Crawford he was suspended immediately pending investigation results. He needed to surrender his badge, weapon, and all department gear. He wouldn't be permitted on department grounds. He'd be contacted when the investigation finished. Crawford nodded. He looked ready to vomit. Edmund was discharged from the hospital at 2 a.m. His wife collected him. She was livid and demanded to know why he hadn't called her immediately. Edmund explained he hadn't wanted to alarm her until he knew the severity of his injuries. She told him that was absurd. He was the police chief and had been assaulted by one of his own officers. That was serious regardless. Edmund didn't debate it. He was exhausted and hurting. He just wanted to get home. But he understood that come morning this would be far from finished. This was going to explode. The body camera recording would need to be released. There'd be investigations. There'd be media coverage. There'd be questions about why an officer like Crawford with 2 prior complaints remained on the streets. What consequences do you think Crawford deserves? Keep going. The body camera footage went public 5 days later. Edmund himself decided to release it. Some advisors urged against it, arguing it would make him appear vulnerable or weak. Edmund disagreed. He argued transparency wasn't weakness. He pointed out that if this had happened to an average citizen, the video would be made public. The same standard should apply to him. The video exploded online within hours. Millions watched Officer Crawford slam Police Chief Edmund Williams face first onto the pavement for questioning why he was being searched. The responses were swift and powerful. Some focused on Crawford failing to recognize his own chief. Others concentrated on the broader implications of how officers treat people during traffic stops when they assume nobody important is watching. Civil rights groups immediately seized the case. They emphasized that Edmund was a police chief, someone with authority and influence, yet he'd still been treated this way during a routine traffic stop. What did that reveal about how ordinary black citizens were treated? If a police chief could be thrown to the ground over a turn signal violation, what hope did everyone else have? The police union issued a statement claiming Crawford deserved due process and a fair investigation. They pledged the union would protect his rights. That statement lasted precisely 2 days before the union retracted it after their members viewed the body camera recording. Even the union couldn't justify what the video plainly demonstrated. Edmund conducted a press conference 1 week following the incident. The cut above his eye remained visible, covered by a small bandage. He stood at a podium in City Hall with the mayor at his side. He spoke for 12 minutes. He declared what happened to him was wrong. He called it a clear demonstration of excessive force. He stated Officer Crawford would face proper consequences. But then he said something unexpected. He explained this wasn't solely about one rogue officer. He said this concerned training, accountability, and the policing culture that enabled officers like Crawford to maintain their positions despite multiple complaints. He acknowledged his responsibility as chief for not tackling these problems more forcefully earlier. He promised changes were coming. The district attorney filed charges against Crawford 2 weeks after the incident: assault, battery, filing a fraudulent report, civil rights violation under color of law. Crawford was arrested at his residence. He posted bail and was freed. His trial was scheduled for 4 months out. Internal Affairs wrapped up their investigation in 3 weeks. They determined Crawford had broken department policy on numerous fronts: use of force without cause, failure to de-escalate, failure to properly evaluate the situation, failure to summon immediate medical help. The recommendation was termination. Crawford was fired 30 days after the traffic stop. He challenged the decision through the union. The challenge was rejected. He was no longer a police officer. His law enforcement credentials were suspended, awaiting his criminal trial outcome. Edmund returned to duty 2 weeks after the incident. His shoulder still ached, and he still suffered headaches from the concussion, but he insisted he needed to be present to execute the changes he'd promised. He began by examining every officer's complaint record. Anyone with more than one excessive force complaint was marked for additional scrutiny. He uncovered something troubling. Crawford had 2 formal complaints on record. But there were also 4 other occasions where citizens had attempted to file complaints but had been discouraged by desk officers or handed complicated forms they never finished. Those incidents had never entered Crawford's official file. Edmund overhauled the complaint system immediately. All complaints would now be accepted in person, by telephone, by email, or through an online portal. No citizen would be rejected or discouraged. Every complaint would be documented and investigated, even if it appeared trivial. The days of complaints vanishing before becoming official were finished. He also mandated de-escalation training for every officer in the department. Not merely a single session, but continuous quarterly training. Officers would be assessed on their de-escalation capabilities. It would factor into their performance evaluations. Do these reforms seem adequate? Share your thoughts. The trial started 4 months after the traffic stop. The prosecution's argument was straightforward and crushing. They screened the body camera recording on day 1. The jury watched Officer Crawford throw Chief Edmund Williams to the ground. They heard the collision. They saw the blood. They heard Crawford fabricate his radio report about Edmund resisting. The defense attempted to claim Crawford had feared for his safety. The prosecutor questioned why he'd feared for his safety during a turn signal violation. The defense argued Edmund had pulled away when Crawford tried to restrain him. The prosecutor replayed the footage in slow motion. It revealed Edmund barely moving, just a reflexive response to being grabbed roughly. Edmund testified on day 3. He recounted the traffic stop calmly and accurately. He explained he'd followed every instruction. He noted he'd asked reasonable questions about the search. He stated Crawford had applied force without warning or justification. The defense attempted to suggest Edmund should have identified himself as police chief. Edmund countered that he shouldn't require a title to receive basic human dignity during a traffic stop. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. They convicted Crawford on all charges. Sentencing was set for 3 weeks later. At sentencing, the judge addressed Crawford directly. He explained that police officers receive substantial power and authority. When they misuse that power, they violate public trust. He emphasized what Crawford had done was especially heinous because he'd done it to a man who'd obeyed every command. The fact the man was the police chief was almost irrelevant. The real issue was Crawford had employed violence unnecessarily and lied about it afterward. Crawford received 3 years in prison. He'd serve at least 18 months before parole eligibility. He'd never work in law enforcement again. His certification was permanently stripped. Edmund pushed forward with his reforms at the department. During the first year following the incident, complaints against officers actually jumped by 40%. But this wasn't because officers were performing worse. It was because citizens finally trusted their complaints would be heard. Edmund viewed this as advancement. He also launched a program where command staff, including himself, would occasionally ride along on patrol shifts, not to supervise, but to observe and grasp what officers encountered on the streets. He wanted to stay grounded in the reality of police work. The incident transformed Edmund in ways difficult to quantify. He'd been a police officer for 26 years. He'd confronted danger. He'd navigated difficult situations, but he'd never experienced police violence firsthand until that night. It provided him a perspective he hadn't fully grasped before. He thought about all the people who'd been treated the way Crawford treated him. People with no power, no title, no capacity to defend themselves. People who'd been slammed to the ground and arrested without body camera footage to validate what truly occurred. People who'd complained and been dismissed. The realization haunted him. If you've stayed this long, thank you for caring about accounts like this. Please subscribe so we can continue delivering the truth. Officer Crawford served 19 months in prison before parole release. He granted no interviews. He issued no public comments. He relocated to another state and found construction work. His life in law enforcement had ended. Edmund served as police chief for 3 additional years following the incident. He implemented every reform he'd pledged. Complaint investigations rose. Use of force incidents dropped. Community relations gradually strengthened. It wasn't flawless, but it was improved. He retired at 51, sooner than originally intended. He explained he'd accomplished what he'd aimed to do. The department was healthier than when he'd started. It was time for someone new to carry it forward. At his retirement ceremony, someone asked which case from his career had affected him most. He described the night he was assaulted during a traffic stop by one of his own officers. He said it had shown him that titles and authority meant nothing when someone chose to abuse their power. The body camera recording from that night is still utilized in police academies nationwide. It's presented as an illustration of excessive force and improper escalation. Instructors pause the video at critical moments and ask trainee officers what Crawford should have done differently. The responses are always identical. He shouldn't have ordered Edmund from the car for a minor violation. He should have addressed Edmund's questions. He should have de-escalated rather than using force. He should have understood that compliance doesn't mean silence. Edmund Williams is now 52 years old. The scar above his eye remains visible upon close inspection. His shoulder still troubles him occasionally when it rains, but he's alive and well and capable of sharing his experience. He knows many who've endured similar experiences aren't as fortunate. He speaks periodically at community events and police reform conferences. He recounts the story of that traffic stop. He displays the body camera footage and poses a straightforward question. If this could happen to a police chief, what's happening to ordinary citizens every single day? The question lingers in the air because everyone already knows the response. They've always known, but now they have video evidence. Now they have the body camera recording of a police officer throwing his own chief face first onto the pavement over a turn signal. And that footage, more than any speech or research or data, reveals the complete truth about what occurs when power confronts accountability, or in most situations, when power encounters its total absence. Thank you for following this story through to the end. If it opened your eyes or shifted your perspective, please share it. Accounts like Edmund's need to be heard, and your support makes that possible.